Now that the NHL has started to see its offseason trades begin, we will be speculating on potential trade targets by position on this episode of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, Caniacs. I'm your host, Jared Ellis, and you're listening to Locked On Hurricanes on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl. And when you enter promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free Yeti-style custom Bird Dogs tumbler with every order. And as always, I am joined by my co-host, Andrew Schnittker. How are you doing this afternoon, Andrew?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm ready for some speculation season here.
Yes, I am as well. And we saw our first big trade yesterday between the Columbus Blue Jackets, Philadelphia Flyers, and LA Kings. Saw that yesterday, so we figured it's a good time to start speculating on what we could potentially see the Carolina Hurricanes do this offseason. Now, of course, it is important to note that this is all speculation. Things could change at the drop of a dime. We could be totally wrong on all this. We could be right on all this. It's who knows? It's still very early in the Hurricanes off season. They still got guys to re-sign, and things can change on a whim with this stuff. So we're gonna start with the forwards. This is kind of the one that a lot of folks have been talking about of things they could potentially do. Don Waddell mentioned them adding some strength, some size, and some scoring this offseason. Obviously, that could be with free agents, of course, which we'll talk about in a later episode. But Andrew, you had a list of guys that you think the Hurricanes could target in terms of forwards. Who you got on there?
Well, I'll start with the obvious one, or at least one that I think is obvious. That was rumored that the Hurricanes could be interested in at the trade deadline. That did not come to fruition, but that is a potential reunion with a former Hurricanes top 5 draft pick Elias Lindholm. Since going to the Calgary Flames in the trade that brought Dougie Hamilton to Carolina, Lindholm has really blossomed into a productive top 6 center. He mostly played on the wing when he was with the Hurricanes. The Flames moved him over to center. He was drafted as a center, and he's done really well there. I mean, you look at his time in Calgary, he's got seasons of 78 points, 82 points, 64 points. This past season, he scored 22 goals, 42 assists. Year before that, 42 goals, 40 assists. He does have a year under left on his contract at that $4.85 million cap hit. The Hurricanes would have to find a way to probably fit in a long-term extension for him. I think it'd be worth it. I think he's a really, really good player. It's kind of funny because some might look at this as a retread, but like you look at the Elias Lindholm that he was when the Hurricanes traded him and the Elias Lindholm that he is now, you'd be getting a different player. Again, a top 6 center would form a really, really nice 1-2 punch down the middle with Sebastian Aho. Really good two-way player, good playmaker, has a really good shot, can play power play, penalty kill. Kind of that all-around center that I think would really, really strengthen the Hurricanes down the middle as a whole, because you look at the ripple effect too. If say you bump a guy like Jesperi Kotkaniemi down to your third center spot, you make your top 6 better as a whole. Imagine a line of, say, Andrei Svechnikov, Elias Lindholm, and Martin Necas, and what that could do. Would not be cheap in terms of trade costs, even with a year left on his deal, with the Flames potentially moving into a little bit more of a rebuild. If they decide to move on from some of these guys, it would probably cost a pretty good haul of picks and prospects to get Elias Lindholm back. I think it'd be worth it. I think for me personally, just looking at everything it would do for the lineup, he's probably number 1 on my wish list for the Hurricanes this offseason.
Yeah, and you talk about how the Hurricanes would have to shuffle the lineup again. Sebastian Aho, he's going to stay the top line center. You mentioned yesterday Kotkaniemi moving down to third line center. That's interesting. Not, I mean, it would obviously happen if they were to trade for Lindholm, but you kind of figure they signed Kotkaniemi to be that second line center, and it would be interesting to see how that would change things. Because you also figure Jordan Stahl, he'll resign if Kotkaniemi gets bumped down to third line. That would make Stahl fourth line. It'd be obviously the Hurricanes would be extremely deep at the center position there, but that would be a very interesting thing for them to do as far as the cost for him. You are completely right. It would definitely cost a pretty penny in terms of picks, prospects. Honestly, I think they would have to give up an NHL player as well. And that would be interesting because obviously we've said it before, to get good, you got to give up good. And if Wayne Gretzky can be traded, anybody can be traded. So it would be interesting to see who the Hurricanes would send over to Calgary in this deal. And it's interesting to think about, because he's not the player that he was when he was here, like you said. And it'd be very interesting to see who they would give up. You mentioned, him being on a line with Martin Necas. Honestly, I hate to say it, but Martin Necas was a guy that I was thinking could be involved in that trade package. Uh, because I don't see them giving up like Brett Pesce or Brady Shea. I don't see them doing that. But again, if Wayne Gretzky can be traded, anybody can be traded. But yeah, it would be a hefty price, that's for sure. But who do you think, in terms of the NHL roster, that the Hurricanes would potentially have to give up for Elias Lindholm?
One thing I wonder about with looking at where the Flames are, if you could sweeten the deal for them in terms of more assets, more picks and prospects,
Hmm.
maybe you send Teuvo Teravainen in the other direction.
Yeah.
I don't think his value is super high right now, given the year that he's coming off of. But you're betting on a bounce back for him. He does have a year on his deal left as well, so the Flames can either, there's a lot of things they could do with him. They can evaluate him, see if they think he's a good fit for their group, what they're trying to do going forward. They could re-sign him, or he comes in there, he has a good deal. Then he's a pending UFA, and you can flip him at the trade deadline for more assets if you're the Flames. So
Hmm.
that could be a possibility, but I also think you could very well be right that it could take a guy like Martin Necas to bring in Elias Lindholm, and I would still do that. I think
Yeah.
the Hurricanes are a better team with Elias Lindholm than they are with Martin Necas.
Yeah, I agree there, and I think regardless of who we talk about today, in potential trade packages, I do think Tavo he's a good chance to be in those trade packages. Coming off the year he's had, he's got 1 year left, and as a fan, you don't want to see him go. He's been a good part of this Hurricanes turnaround. So you don't want to see him to go in that aspect, but you look at the upper echelon guys on the roster. If you're trying to trade for one, yeah, he's a guy. He's looking like he could definitely sweeten a trade package. But Elias Lindholm, he's definitely high on the list for sure. But who else do you have on there?
Well, another guy that was rumored to be a potential pickup for the Hurricanes at the trade deadline is Nick Schmaltz, center for the Arizona Coyotes. He's played really well since going from Chicago to Arizona a few years ago. You look at the last 2 years, he's put up about 20 goals, 60 points. He's another center, so he's probably another, not nearly the caliber of Elias Lindholm, but still a really good player that you probably plug into that 2C spot, push Jesperi Kotkaniemi down the depth chart. The thing about him, he does have 3 years left at a 5.85 cap hit, which is pretty reasonable. And that's the kind of move. If you look at what the Hurricanes have done, like trading away a first round pick for Brady Shea when he had, I think, 3 or 4 years left on his deal, they like going out and getting players with term. And I know they would love going out and getting a top six center who's at a reasonable price. I think Arizona is a team that's obviously in clear rebuild mode, so I think that you are probably looking at picks and prospects with this one. I definitely think Teuvo Teravainen is a player who again could be valuable in a return for Arizona because you bring him in, you give him top line minutes, hope he gets back to more productive. And again, they're a team. They're probably in seller mode at the trade deadline. Well, if Teuvo Teravainen has a good start to the year, that gives again same one like I said with Calgary, that gives them an asset they can flip at the deadline. So if the Hurricanes want to go the top six center route, but they don't want to quite go break the bank for a guy like Elias Lindholm or even a Mark Scheifele in terms of what you would have to give up for trade assets in both of them and have to extend them in a year. Instead, you get a guy maybe not quite as good, but still a really good player who is locked in for 3 more years at an affordable rate, which is going to be important to the Hurricanes with the deals they have coming up.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's gonna be a big thing, with deals that they have coming up of making smart trades, not just making a trade for the sake of making a trade, like we've seen, teams across sports, do in the past. They, don't necessarily think about the long-term aspect of it, and I think that's going to be a key thing in whatever moves that the Hurricanes decide to make, whether it's Schmaltz, whether it's Lindholm, or whoever they end up going after. I think, especially if they were to go after a guy with a heavier cap hit, then they could maybe do sort of like they did with San Jose last year of have them retain some salary. I could definitely see them do something like that as well. Do you have any other forwards on your list before we move on to defensemen?
Yeah, a few. You've got Victor Arvidsson with the Los Angeles Kings. 1 year left at like a 4-ish million cap hit. He's a player I really liked as a potential target for the Hurricanes when Nashville still moved him. Still somebody I like now. Coming off a really good season, 26 goals, 59 points. I think he'd be a really, really nice fit on the wing next to Sebastian Aho. Provide some of that additional goal scoring that the Hurricanes are looking for. He is, I said he's got a year left. Dom Waddell mentioned potentially going after some teams that are trying to shed cap. And rumor is that with some of the other guys that the Kings need to re-sign, like Vladislav Gavrikov, who they got at the trade deadline, that Arvidsson could be a guy they're looking to move on from with a year left on his deal. Now, he would not be a pure cap dump like
Mhm.
Max Pacioretty was last year because he's not coming off an injury-riddled year. His cap hit's not nearly as high. So the Hurricanes would have to part with, I think, a good asset, a good pick, a good prospect, maybe a combination to get a guy like him. And then you look at potentially what you would have to do in terms of extending him. Maybe they're okay with it being more of a 1 year rental type situation and then seeing if they can bring him back just to add that goal scoring for them next year. But he would be an interesting piece. Alex DeBrincat, he's a pending RFA from the Ottawa Senators, coming off a 27 goal season. Bit of a step back from where he was at in Chicago, but playing with lesser players, you'd expect him to probably bounce back if he was playing with Sebastian Aho on the Hurricanes. Could give them that pure goal scoring they're looking for. He is an RFA. Contract would probably not be cheap. I mean, you're probably looking at somewhere in the 8-9 million range, so that'd be tough to fit in, but that'd be an option. I think it'd probably cost you Martin H's plus maybe a pick. And then there's some other guys like that might, not cost you much that might be in more of that Max Pacioretty range, like a Blake Wheeler from the Jets if they're looking to move
I've
on
seen
from
that
him.
one thrown around a lot. I've
He's a,
also
he's got a he's got a year left. His cap hits like 8 something million. It's the Hurricanes could fit that for a year. They'd need the Jets to retain salary. Um, but probably a guy who wouldn't cost a ton in a trade, but could still provide them with some good goal scoring, and certainly would accomplish Don Waddell's goal of adding both heaviness and goal scoring. So if they're looking to go more of the bargain bin trade route like they did last offseason with Max Pacioretty, Blake Wheeler's certainly a name I could see them targeting.
yeah, and again, all this stuff, things could change tomorrow. It could change after we get done recording today. So we'll obviously continue to talk about this stuff as the off season rolls on, more information comes out, more rumors come out. We'll continue talking about this, but it's time to talk about defensemen, and we will do that right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, we've talked about Birddogs a lot here recently. You guys know how much I like them. They are super, super comfortable. I've worn them to Monday Night Raw, to the Paramore show, to go get a new tattoo. They're really, really comfortable, and they make you look good. Birddogs stretched khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddogs do the same exact thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, resisting cotton. Birddogs fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Birddogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool, dry, and all day long. I can attest to that. When I was walking around downtown Charlotte with my friend pre-Paramore show, they were really, really comfortable. I didn't get all sweaty and nasty. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl and enter promo code lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Now, again, folks, the Hurricanes, they have a lot to do this offseason with defensemen being an interesting thing. Of course, obviously, Brent Burns, he's still here for a few more years. Jacob Slavin, we still got him. Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, they're going to be wanting to get extensions in place for those guys. And Jalen Chatfield, he has a year left on his extension, but you look to his partner. That's where, the hole opens up. Now, we've talked about before, come deep into free agency if they haven't, made a trade or made a signing. We could see, the potential of Calvin DeHaan coming back. Dylan Coughlin, again, we've said, he's going to be gone. But, we don't see them, making a big defenseman splash like they did last year, bringing in Brent Burns. Don't see that happening again. So if they were to make a trade for a defenseman, it would definitely be like a third pairing defenseman. So, you're not going to see, a super big name here. But, again, I'm definitely thinking, third pairing kind of guy if they were to do anything. Where do you stand on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. I think your top four, barring something unexpected like using Brett Pesce or Brady Shea in a trade package, I think your top four is pretty locked in for next year with Slavin and Burns. Excuse me, and Shea and Pesce, and then with Chatfield anchoring half of the right pairing or third pairing, you need another guy for that third pairing. Couple guys whose names have been floated: Sean Walker and Sean Durzi with the Kings. Durzi's an interesting option as a Gostisbehere replacement because he's 24. He was the second power play unit quarterback for the Kings last year. Similar to what Gostisbehere did for the Canes, he can play the left and right side. He's got a 1.7 million cap hit next season, and after that, he's an RFA. Probably wouldn't be super cheap, but would give you, I think, another really nice third pairing you can rely on with Chatfield. 9 goals, 38 points last year. Another guy from the Kings, Sean Walker. He's also signed for another year, 2.65 million. Then he's a UFA. He's a little bit more of, I think, that like shut down, stay home type guy, but I think could also potentially be a good fit next to Chatfield. So those would be two types of options that I would look at there.
Yeah, I definitely don't see them, doing, anything really crazy at the deadline or, in terms of a trade this offseason for a third pairing defenseman. Again, that stuff is the top four, pretty well locked up, like you said. And honestly, this is probably, a position I really honestly don't see them making any sort of trade for. I think this is kind of one they'll rely on internally or in free agency. I think, in terms of trades, they're going to be looking at forwards or potentially um, making a trade for a goalie if need be. That's where I see them, focusing their trades this offseason. I don't really see any sort of defenseman trade. Really, the only way I see, a defenseman coming in is if it is in like a package deal, like we were talking about, with Teuvo Teravainen, potentially being in a package deal. That's where I see, this stuff going. A team throws in, like we saw last year, how Vegas threw in Dylan Coghlan in that Max Pacioretty trade. That's really the only way I see the Hurricanes, getting a defenseman in a trade this offseason. If it's just a tack on thing, or some or a prospect in a deal. That's really the only way I'm seeing them getting a defenseman in a trade this offseason. What do you think about that, Andrew?
I agree with you. I think, Shane Gostisbehere is probably going to walk, but I think, that third pairing defensive role is something that you can get in free agency rather than spending your trade assets on that. So that's the route I see them going as well.
Yeah, I just don't see them, going crazy with this position because there's really no need for them to. Yeah, they also have guys, in I'd say in Chicago, but in the AHL, that they could, potentially, call up. Max Lajoie, he is a guy that the Hurricanes have relied on in the past. I do believe he is an RFA this offseason, but he's a guy, I definitely see the Hurricanes bringing back. And, he could be a guy that, they bring up, depending on how training camp goes, if they're able to get anything in free agency, because, we do think Shane Gostisbehere is probably gonna be gone, but, he did say Carolina is still an option. So, it's not a full guarantee that he's gonna be gone, but, there's always that chance that, Carolina offers him a better deal than, I don't know, Chicago or Vegas or LA or anything like that. We talked about the Kings a lot today. Yeah. So, there's always that chance that he could end up re-signing with the Hurricanes if he doesn't find a deal he likes elsewhere. And then again, like we've said, deep into free agency, if the Hurricanes haven't found anyone, bringing Calvin DeHaan back again, could totally see that happening. But again, I just don't see them making any sort of trade for a third pairing defenseman. They made their big splash with that position last offseason. But now it's time to move over into the goalies. This is the one that a lot of people have been having fun talking about, and we will talk about right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, the Stanley Cup final is underway, as well as the NBA finals. And if you're wanting to make a bet on either of those series, do so at FanDuel, because right now, new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So you get, first goal scorer in game 3 of the Stanley Cup final wrong, FanDuel's got you covered. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's fanduel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, the goalie position. Do the Hurricanes make a trade here this offseason? That's going to be a big question mark. Don Waddell talked about how, the Freddie Anderson, Antti Raanta both want to come back. We've talked about this already in free agency, definitely thinking the Hurricanes are really going to try to get Freddie Anderson back. Potential of Antti Raanta coming back as well, more in a backup role again, but kind of see that as the less likely option of them rolling with Anderson and Kochetkov next year. Now, let's say they aren't able to get anything done with either of these guys. They can't get a deal done with Freddie. They can't get a deal done with Antti Raanta. And then you're left with just Kochetkov. He's definitely not ready for that #1 role yet. I definitely think in a couple years he absolutely will be ready for that role. But as we stand right now, June 7th, 2023, he is not ready to be the Hurricanes' #1 goalie. So, say they do have to make a trade. Yeah, there's a couple names that really come to mind. One that we've seen floating around a lot is Connor Hellebuck from the Winnipeg Jets. That would be a very interesting trade because he's Vezina winner, multi-time Vezina finalist. That would be very interesting to see what the Hurricanes would give up there. Uh, obviously that's a really, really stinking good goalie that they'd be getting. And then you put him on, the Hurricanes, and he has, that Hurricanes defensive group and that forward group in front of him. It'd be crazy to see what he could do here in Raleigh. That would be absolutely awesome. It would be a trade I would like, but it's one that wouldn't come cheap either. We talk about Teuvo Teravainen being in a trade package. Probably lock that one in there. Marty Necas, definitely could see him being in there. Obviously, some prospects and some picks as well. But what do you think about the potential of Connor Hellebuck getting traded to the Hurricanes, Andrew?
It's not happening. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I would be completely shocked. That would be a complete 180 from the way that the Hurricanes have handled the goaltending position under this front office. They've mostly gone the relatively reasonable free agent deals. Mark, you go back to when they first signed Peter Mrazek and then re-signed him. You look at signing Frederik Andersen and Antti Raanta a couple of years ago. I mean, to get Hellebuck, you would have to spend significant trade assets, and then you've got him making.
I know he's not cheap.
Let's see, his cap hit is $6.1 million for this year, which is already more than the Hurricanes have spent on a goalie under this regime. Now, he's worth it. I'm just saying I don't think that's where they want to spend their big money. And then if you want to give him an extension, which you almost certainly would if you spent the kind of trade cost it would take to get him, you're probably looking at $8 or $9 million. You can't pay a goalie $8 or $9 million when you're talking about extending Sebastian Aho, extending Brady Shea, extending Brett Pesce, extending Jacob Slavin in a year or two. It's just not going to work, and it's just not the way that the Hurricanes again have operated at that position. I would just be absolutely flabbergasted if they did that.
Yeah, it's again, as a fan, it would be cool to see. Obviously, it's a trade. You'd be making on where's the PlayStation? On NHL. What are they at 23 or something like that? That's the trade you'd make there. And again, it would be cool. Obviously, it would be cool. But like you said, Andrew, it would not come cheap. It's not really how this regime has operated so far. And another name that saw a comment on YouTube on our last video that we'll mention here because pre-YouTube, back when the Hurricanes were still rolling with Peter Mrazek and James Reimer, a name I talked about of them potentially getting in a trade was John Gibson from Anaheim. They're obviously kind of in rebuild mode as well. Kind of like Arizona, kind of just shipping off assets to bring more in, to get better in the future. That would be a very interesting one. Obviously, we talked about back then, with JD from Locked On Ducks. So that is another trade that would not come cheap. The Hurricanes would have to give up, significant assets, but that is, it would give you a solid #1 goalie. And I do believe he has a pretty hefty cap hit as well. So much like Hellebuck, it's kind of a trade I don't see happening. Same with both of these guys. If they were able to make a trade, Anaheim, Winnipeg, they're retaining salary for these guys for sure, at least on remaining term of the deals that they have now. Very much like with Hellebuck, the Hurricanes would have to give up significant assets, prospect trades, NHL players. You look at Teravainen, you look at Necas. They would have to give up a pretty penny to get John Gibson. But on the flip side, it would be fun to see him play on a good team, but I just don't know if that good team would necessarily be the Hurricanes.
So here's the thing about John Gibson. I agree with you. It's pretty unlikely. I think it's more likely than Hellebuck. He
Yeah.
does have 3 years left, or 4 years left, excuse me, at a 6.4 million cap hit. So that falls more in line with the Hurricanes liking to get guys with term left at relatively reasonable rates. Here's the thing, though. You look at his numbers the past few years. This past year, 3.99 goals against average, 0.899 save percentage.
Hmm.
Year before that, 3.19 goals against average, 0.904. Now, again, the Ducks have been a pretty terrible hockey team the past couple of years. So you're essentially banking on him bouncing back and behind the Hurricanes defense instead, which is a good bet. But are you willing to give up significant trade assets and pay that much money for that many years to a guy that's like, especially with how volatile goaltending is, that you're essentially banking on rebounding with a better team in front of him, which is not always a safe bet. It doesn't always happen with these
Hmm.
guys. I'd be leery of that personally.
Yeah.
I think he's a really good goalie, and I do think he still has a lot of good hockey left in front of him. But again, it's just if it's a huge trade cost, his his performances the past couple. And again, I don't watch Ducks hockey. I mean, it may be those goals are all like, you know, breakaways, odd man rushes, turnovers in the dead slot that he can't do anything about. And I'm sure there's a lot of that going on again with the state of the Ducks and with them giving up that many goals. But giving up a significant haul for him would give me a little bit of pause.
Yeah. And one thing I do think that the Hurricanes could, if they were to swing that trade, they could kind of look at, well, look at his numbers these past couple years. They haven't been great, and that could kind of bring his trade price down. And entice, and they could give up a bit less. They maybe wouldn't have to give up Marty Natchez. I think if they were to swing that trade, I do think they do have to give up Teuvo Teravainen as well as a couple picks, couple prospects. Again, it's still not going to come cheap, but I do think they could maybe lower the price a little bit because in sports, not just hockey, and it is very much a "what have you done for me lately" kind of deal. So I do think they could work that in their favor, as well as maybe get Anaheim to retain a bit of salary there. But ultimately, I don't necessarily see the Hurricanes trading for a goalie this offseason. I just don't see that happening. Again, it would be great to see Connor Hellebuck in a Hurricanes jersey. It would be great to see John Gibson bounce back in a Hurricanes jersey. Of course, as hockey fans, it'd be fun to see. It's stuff you again would be doing on your video games on your GM the dynasty mode thing. That those are trades you make there. And again, you make those on your video games. It's just not, and you do them with like the salary cap turned off. You give them Patrick Mahomes size deal or whatever. You win 10 straight Stanley Cups. Uh, you turn the sliders all to easy. You rack up like 100 goals in a game or whatever. Again, those are that kind of trades. These aren't trades that I realistically see happening. I when it comes to the goalie position this offseason, I see the Hurricanes re-signing Frederik Andersen. That is what I see them doing. And pretty comparable deal to what he's on now. Maybe an extra year or so. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But again, as fun as this stuff would be, I just don't see these trades happening. Uh, in terms of any other goalies besides Hellebuck, beside Gibson, do you think there could be anyone that the Hurricanes could potentially go after this offseason, Andrew?
The only other guy I think who's really rumored to be on the market is Dan Vladar, the backup goalie in Calgary. Made a career high 23 starts this past season. Numbers weren't very good. I'm not sure you like that as a pairing with Pyotr Kochetkov because
Yeah.
it'd be fairly volatile. Not a lot of certainty. I think I'm with you. I think I see them resigning Anderson, and if they don't resign him, they don't resign Ronta. I think they turn to the free agent market again to find their other goalie.
Yeah, that's what I see them doing this offseason. And again, I'm not saying, yeah, we don't want those trades to happen because, of course, it'd be fun to see. But realistically, what they'd have to give up, it's just don't see it happening. And then, like we said, with John Gibson, really banking on him bouncing back, which, I think, if he had a good team in front of him, I do think his numbers would improve. But like Andrew said, a goalie position is extremely volatile. You never know what can happen there. So it's going to be an interesting offseason to see what the Hurricanes do. But ultimately, I think when we see them making trades, it's going to be with forwards. I think the only way they pick up a defenseman or goalie in a trade is when it's just tacked on at the end, much like Dylan Coghlan was for the Max Patre trade. That's the only way I really see this happening, or if it's a prospect. That's the only way I see this happening. But let us know what trades you guys think will happen, whether it be for a forward, defenseman, goalie. Let us know down in the comments on YouTube. Tweet at us at LO_Hurricanes. Myself on Twitter at Jared E_96. I still have not fixed my Twitter handle on the new layout. So we're eventually going to get that fixed. And then Andrew on Twitter at ASchnitt53. With the Jeff Skinner shout out. That could be a fun topic one day of looking back on Jeff Skinner's career with the Hurricanes. But that's an episode for another day. And we will talk to you guys in the next episode. And as always, let's go Canes.